right, welcome back. It is now time for the dailies today, and in the studio we have Sunday Michael. You're welcome to the studio.
It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with Daily Trust newspaper, and we have a few headlines here on the front page. The first one being bandits kill 7 policemen in Zamfara, and this can be found in page 8. This is a really sad development. We also have Annabra Governorship saying Soludo maintains lead as INEC collates Ihiala's results. We hope there won't be any cause for concern once the results come out. And the major story, written in bold in the front page of the newspaper here, says residents decry rot in FCT as reps summon minister. And we have a few writers here. Legislators frown at poor waste management, say Abuja terribly unsafe. Chide Bello over non-appointment of mandate secretaries, and more of this particular story can be found in page 5. Moving on to the footnote of the newspaper. After Daily Trust report, federal government orders NNPC to collect freight charges for petrol in Naira. I remember we talked about this yesterday. An accusation that NIMASA and National Ports Authority, collect freight charges in dollars instead of Naira. Okay, moving on to more stories. National Assembly okays e-transmission of election results, direct primaries, and that can be found in page 38. Page 6, you can find readership drop affecting newspapers' revenue, and that's from NPAN. And this particular story here on page 4 says food security. Nigeria plans Operation Feed Yourself. We'll find out more about that.
We'll get to hear the details of that story.
Later.
Actually responding to the Annabra governorship elections about Soludo maintaining leadership as INEC collates Ihiala. Actually, ABGA candidate Charles Soludo wins Annabra governorship election.
Oh, wow.
It has recently, been announced. Let's take a look at some of the stories on the Punch newspaper this morning. The big headline there states e-transmission of results, direct primaries. Governors run to Buhari as senators, reps defy parties, transmit bill next week. A writer is saying National Assembly members outsmart governors, pass Electoral Act amendment bill. Another writer is saying we will veto bill if Buhari fails to assent legislation, says federal lawmakers. And you find on page 17 of the Punch newspaper, field depots to pay NNPC's shipping charges in Naira. And on page 17 of the Punch newspaper, anchor borrowers, farmers owe CBN 463 billion Naira as defaults rise. And on page 8 of the Punch newspaper, bandits gun down 7 policemen on patrol in Zamfara. Burn van. That's quite sad, isn't it? You'll find the details of that story on the Punch newspaper. And on page 18, you'd find aviation fuel price rises by 70%. International airlines may rise fares. We're already having high airfares, and already with the rise in fuel price, it looks like it's going to be
increased.
Really alarming.
Wow.
Okay. And on page 8 of the Punch newspaper, you'd find 20 billion bailout. Kogi Assembly threatens to order bank MD's arrest. So these are some of the stories you'd find on the Punch newspaper this morning.
Okay, I'm moving on to the Guardian newspaper. Yes, we have Annabra Guba. INEC declares Soludo winner. Big congratulations to him. And a writer here that says unknown gunmen in shootout with security operatives. Moving on to the next story with a pictorial there. NAS snubs APC governors, passes electoral bill with direct primaries. And it says INEC to determine results transmission mode. Direct primaries now mandatory for political parties. Another writer here says lawmakers to transmit electoral bill to Buhari within 7 days. APC governors oppose direct primary may truncate presidential assent. Direct primaries will overstretch INEC, says PGF chairman, and PDP says no party has right to impose its processes on another. We also have on the footnote there, Kogi Assembly threatens to arrest bank MD, and you can find details of that story on page 5. Europe begins restitution of Africa's looted artifacts, and you can find that on page 4. Still on page 5, gunmen kill retired AVM daughter orderly in Kaduna. This is yet another sad one.
Story.
Yes. On page 7, you'd find IPOB gives Uzodimma ultimatum to free members. And the final story on Guardian newspaper here on page 7, you can find Kanu to appear in court today for treason trial as IPOB declares sit at home. All right, with that, we'll move on to the next paper.
Okay, let's take a look at the stories on the Nation newspaper this morning. You'd see right there, Soludo is governor-elect. INEC declares APGA candidate winner of Annabra poll and stood out by getting 112,229 votes. You find on page 2 of the Nation newspaper, government proposes death penalty for illegal gold miners. Yes, I've been waiting, anticipating to see that. You recently traveled to Jos.
Yes.
Usually when you go there, you see they just mine and just leave the pools like that. So, and it's really terrible that they leave them like that.
Especially, the land, and people dying a lot when they dig wells and, it collapses.
Just let them be like that.
So.
Okay, right on page 3 and 4 of the Nation newspaper, you'd find 7 policemen, Air Force chief grandson, killed. And on page 7 and page 30, you'd find crude oil production drops to 1.52 million per barrel. You'd also find Buhari in France for peace forum. Still on the Nation newspaper, you'd find direct primary, Governors National Assembly clash. So these are some of the major stories on the Nation newspaper.
All right, we'll move on to the final newspaper, which is the Daily Sun. Annabra fears gun battle precedes victory dance. And a few writers here. Soludo maintains lead, security gunmen exchange fire in Ihiala. And that particular story can be found on page 13 of the Daily Sun. Moving on, murder of Super TV boss Chidinma trial adjourned to November 11. You can find that on page 5. Invasion of Justice Odili's home. Senate indicts EFCC, AGF Malami, and police. And a writer here that says demands disclosure of probe panel's findings, tasks IGP on missing Vanguard reporter as reps seek investigation. And that particular story can be found on page 6. Moving on to more stories. Buhari vows to end annual $2 billion wheat importation. And it says federal government states more operation Feed Yourself to counter malnutrition. And that can be found on page 8. Bandits kill 7 policemen in Zamfara state. Gunmen murder retired NAF officer. Abduct 13 local government workers in Kaduna. And this story can be found on page 4 and 5. In 2023, imams, others lobby for Middle Belt presidency. And the writer here says PDP group asks Wike to join presidential race. This story can be found on page 26. Reps summon FCT minister over rising insecurity. Say Abuja has never been this unsafe. This story can be found on page 6. And on page 2, 20 billion naira bailout fund. Kogi Assembly threatens warrant of arrest against bank MD. And we have the lead story here saying NAS, PDP, APC clash over direct primary. Lawmakers pass Electoral Act Amendment Bill, include electronic transmission of election results, promise to transmit bill to Buhari for assent in 7 days. And this story can be found on page 7. And the final story on the footnote says, IPOP declares sit at home as Kanu appears in court today. Can be found on page 4. And these are the stories on the Daily Sun.
Okay, we earlier told you that we have Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust, in the studio to review, some of the stories on the dailies this morning. Earlier when we were talking about minimum wage, you giggled a little. Would you like to comment on that?
The issue of minimum wage is an emotional one. She was talking about how the minimum wage barely even take you home. But the reality is the standard of living across these countries across the country is not the same. The cost of rent, say in Abuja, Port Harcourt, Lagos, maybe some other high-profile cities, are not the same thing with Sokoto, Zamfara, Kebbi, Niger. And minimum wage projections and calculations are supposed to take care of some of these things. So you want to think that people who live in places where they have to cough out more should earn a bit more, so that they can realistically meet ends meet. School fees for private schools around these places are also not the same. The cost of a basket or a tuber of yam here is not the same as you will get, say, in Sokoto and the rest of that. So it's a conversation that has to continue to happen. But at the bottom of everything is it's not enough for you to even get so much money and the prices of everything, goes above the roof. So much money needs to happen on the other side. There needs to be peace for the farmers to go to farm, because it is with excess food that the prices of food can come down. Aviation fuel, production of our own fuel in country has to happen, so that prices of transport would also drop, so that the cost of moving these things would also come down. It is at that point that even if you earn 20,000 naira in a month, perhaps it may be able to do something for you. But like I said, it's an emotional issue. There is no right and wrong answers when it comes to the argument. The labor people don't want to hear anything. Just jack this amount. Even when they started, what they were realistically asking for was over 65,000. It wasn't even where we are today. But it also doesn't make sense, even if they give you 100,000 and the next day you go to the market and everything skyrockets. So.
Right.
Okay, talking about minimum wage, let's talk about food security and the plans for Nigeria to start Operation Feed Yourself. Now, the Vice President said Operation Feed Yourself is simply to encourage Nigerians to establish urban farms and homestead gardens. What do you have to say about this?
It's the way to go. And to be fair, a great deal of Nigerians are already doing that. I'm participating in a seminar since yesterday, and just about every speaker who comes up is saying, I'm into farming, I hope when I leave this place I will go back to my farm. So I think that realization is catching up. What we also need is the technology to catch up. When you go to places like Egypt and Israel, it marvels how countries that are in the desert and on rocky sands are able to even do more agric than those of us with the potentials of a land that can feed the whole of Africa. There's something they are doing that we obviously are not borrowing from. We know about greenhouse farms that put out pests and quadruples the output of production when it comes to things like tomato, cucumber, and fresh farms. We know about, today I saw a technology that allows you to farm yams right at your backyard. You don't need any space. You just need a bag of cement filled with sand, and you put your tuber in it and create the opportunities for the leaves to rise up. That's all. And you do your watering every morning, which is what you expect the rainfalls to do for you. And that is that.
Wow.
And depending on the sack with which you put the tuber in it, the yams can grow to any size you can get from an actual farm.
Wow, that's interesting.
So that's knowledge. That's a gap that we need to close, and these things do not require all the space in the world. And even with the places where we have space, today, what the average Kenyan farmer or European farmer gets from a space of land is quadruple what we get, because of the right kind of seed, the right kind, parameters that we can also replicate here if the knowledge is available. We have left farming to peasants, who can barely even afford fertilizers, or the kind of chemicals or the conditioning of the soils that are necessary. So it is now time for people to begin to approach farming not necessarily as something that you need to feed yourself, but as a business, because it is truly a business. If even playing within the value chain alone, do you know what it takes for a young person who moves Bambara seed, from the north to the east, where it's a staple food, or moving beans from Sokoto to Lagos, or moving plantain from Benin to Abuja, where it is needed almost in every home because children have to go to school in the morning and they need these things to balance their diet. So there's quite a number, and as we create value on this chain, we would not only be feeding ourselves, we'll be providing jobs that we seem to be wasting as it is right now. If you go to the Middle Belt, for instance, some scientists were saying the oranges produced between Taraba and Benue is sweeter than what Coca-Cola uses for its Fanta, the citrus, the quality. But all of the citrus that we need today for the amount of Fantas that we consume in this country is coming in from Tanzania. So what's wrong with processing the one in country? The other day we heard that the guys who produce fruities would discontinue their operations because securities are threatening their expatriates, and that operation has shut down. Those are jobs going away for branding, for bottling, for transportation, for haulage.
Terrible.
Those are jobs we have made. So if you travel along those routes, once they harvest the oranges and take to the market and nobody buy, what do? They come back to the road and just splash them. Those are economic waste, really. Wow.
Okay, now there's this story about residents decry rot in FCT as reps summon minister. Yesterday there was a piece where we saw the House of Representatives accusing the 6 area councils in the FCT of not maintaining the infrastructure within the FCT. Let's take a look at this piece that was sent in before we discuss some of the issues.
The administrative structures of government is not infrastructure. Without the enabling personnel, Mr. Speaker, nobody can perform magic. You can't do all the job. That administration must be enabled. We must see things happen. You delegate responsibilities. Our responsibility is not advisory. We got to get him to do the job. And if there are some imperfections and things that we cannot do, when we interrogate him and interview him, we can refer to the committees to conclude the job. That is how it is done. Yes. It's not a matter of wanting to, look, it's not selective. We want somebody we have hired for a job. Let him give us responses to issues we have raised. So I do not think we are trying to impinge on the responsibilities we have given to the committees. The dearth of infrastructure, the absence of street lights, the ones that are there that are not working, makes it impossible for our citizens to be secure. Somebody is kidnapped or somebody is missing from Gariki. Lecturers are kidnapped from their homes, and schools are invaded, and you're telling me about infrastructure. It's not only infrastructure, our citizens are not secure. And somebody we've hired for a job, we are not looking for somebody who have taken money. We are looking for somebody who have hired the job who is not doing it or doing it.
Okay, so there you have it, legislators frowning at a lot of, things going wrong in the FCT. Let's have your thoughts on this, Mr. Sunday.
As we were saying before the cameras came back, bad as the situation may be, it's also gladdening that we exist in a space with these people and they are beginning to feel the heat because by the time they are done with the puppet, it will just surely get to the Maitamas and the Asokoros of this world. And they are also feeling the stench, of some of these places that are kept. It's saddening. A city that is supposed to be a model city, a pride for the African continent, one that is revered, across the world as one of the finest, could reduce to what it is today. It's only in Abuja that you pass a place in the morning and by evening, refuge would not allow you to use the same road. And to think that they spend about 8 billion naira to clean refuge in this city it's crazy. So there are quite a number of issues that they raise. Prime, on top of all of what they have said, is the issue of insecurity. It's sad if you think of the location of the University of Abuja, just adjacent the international airport and military installations, and the distance you really have to drive off from that place to get out of the city, and a spectacular attack like that could be coordinated in a place that you ordinarily would think is not even fanciful for those kind of attack, beats anybody's imagination. It then means that for you and I, who nobody even cares where we live or what we do, they could just pick us, and for several weeks nobody will even know anybody is missing. You know, the issue of our colleague, the Vanguard journalist, also came up for mention. And it's really a cause for concern that people can just disappear off the surface of this city, no other place than the capital city, and we cannot even account for it. We can't even begin to put a trace to what has happened, to even speculate whether this is a kidnap or any kind of thing for that matter. So it's really painful. Look at the issues of street rights. You are driving around this city, you are worried. It's like driving into a wilderness. To maintain just bulbs for a capital city, that's crazy. Other places are managing to do this, and it's not rocket science. If the bulbs are dead, you replace them. The bulbs are not the most expensive items in this world. It doesn't require any kind of technology other than the maintenance department simply doing their work. You know, so it's good that the House of Rep members and the senators don't live in the moon, because if they could afford to live in the moon, perhaps we would have to live with this plight for a long time. It is good that people know other than people at that level are calling attention to these things. And I mean, look at, sometimes you wonder whether you are in a capital city, painfully. Some states are doing better with less income. We just saw the IGRs of state. After Lagos, Abuja came in even second, higher than Rivers. So we want to really see how and to what extent this huge IGR is put into use for the benefit of people who live in Abuja. You know, so it's good the thing they are raising this is long overdue, and I hope that this is a wake-up call for the people at the FCT.
Okay. Another story of interest is about the e-transmission of results and direct primaries. According to the Punch, governors run to Buhari as senators, reps defy parties, transmit bill next week. We have been seeing quite a lot of conversations, around the e-transmission of result, and now there's been an ascent to that. What are your thoughts about that?
For me, as a journalist, as a Nigerian, I think it's victory for democracy. We had this conversation here on 2 or 3 occasions. What we have seen is a battle for the soul of this country by people who have the means and the power to put forward their own interests ahead of what should be a national interest. What are we even saying? Rather than have people who pretend to represent us go to a process, hijack the process, and install their interests in the name of representing us, we want to be part of the process. How difficult is that? Direct primaries, if you are a card-carrying member of a party, you should have the opportunity to decide who the candidates of those parties are. Rather than all these collegial systems where they said, no, 2-3 people will represent us here, and those 2-3 people will become materials for the highest bidder at this convention, and whoever gives them the highest lot, they pass the buck and interest of their states to those persons as though they are representing truly the wishes and aspirations of this. And we know these are not true. So 2 things. It will broaden the interest in political participation. If you know your voice will count, you will want to participate, like the elections in Annabra. That is what we are seeing. Because people voted and they could see that their choices, were reflected in the outcome of the result. Other people will take interest to say, oh, let's go. These guys did it in Annabra. We can do it also in another place, all right? So, but if it had failed to manifest, because forget what outcomes are. People know what the popular choice is down there, right? If the outcomes do not reflect those popular choices, it only widens the whole talk around voters' apathy.
Right.
It's the same thing with political participation. If we do not open up the space for people to feel that they are a part of a decision and take ownership of that decision, they will continue to feel, whatever you do, these guys will always have their way. So there's no need wasting my time. Let me dedicate it to how I raise my naira and kobo to keep. ends meet. So I think this is a victory for us. Painfully, it's the governors always wanting to have their way, and this time the rep members yielding because they were almost going to give in, right? So yielding to the popular cry, from the citizenry that you are going to betray public trust by not yielding to this popular demand. The electronics voting, beautiful. I mean, if it wasn't going to work, it wouldn't have worked in Annabra.
Right.
At any rate, it has its own hitches. But nothing is exactly perfect, as we have seen, even with the United States, whose election was marred with all kinds. We saw in the U.S. that election results went on and on for more than a week. So it's nothing special if it's happening here for a place with high broadband penetration, for us who are struggling with infrastructures and all of that. So it's about being patient. It's about going through a process that is foolproof, where nobody can replicate your thumbprint or your biometrics, and where those positions you have taken can be re-verified, and not just people sitting somewhere and thumbprinting 5,000 ballot boxes and then throw. And then even in terms of cost, we spend so much doing elections in this country. 100 billion, 200 billion. Imagine 100 billion sank into road construction in a state,
Right.
or even into food productions, or even into our health system. You know what the size of 100 billion naira hospital would be? Just for a 1 week exercise, yeah, it's important, but there are better ways we can do it. So if we could do it electronically, where we could show up with electronic gadget and then register these votes, and it manifests, and it saves us all that paper, all that logistics of transporting some of these things. Why not? This is 2021, for God's sake,
Right.
And I think that's the way to go.
Okay, now let's talk about the Annabra governorship election. Soludo has been declared the winner. Well, some would say we didn't see that coming. What are your thoughts about that?
I honestly also did see that coming, largely because he's been in the race before. This is not his first time. And Annabra, for his peculiar nature, seemed to defy odds. Kind of. They are beginning to create an identity of sorts for themselves. But as much as I didn't see it coming, in my heart of heart, I really wanted leaders that look slightly to reflect some of our aspirations as a people. So sometimes we have argued that perhaps if the quality and the education of our leaders was top-notch,
Priority.
they will also raise the bar. It's not exactly true every time, but there's a professor in Brunei, and all of us can attest to. But again, there's another professor somewhere else who comes up with these mighty budget names, but we don't see them exactly in the streets. But the idea is, from my mind, I am looking at a leader who had proved himself at the national level. Some of the innovations that he brought to the CBN and some of the reforms that he brought to the Nigerian economic system, it's what has kept the bank viral, despite all of the kind of challenges they had faced. And I think that given the opportunity, he can, advance the cause of that state, because Annabra is a sleeping giant. With all the things that go on there, that state can be better placed, to be contributing to national discourse and to become a model for other states to say, we want to see how you are doing it, like we say with Lagos every time. To talk about a city that has the highest number of billionaires in this country, that have factories that are mentioned. Annabra is a state where you have an Namco that produces car, and the innocent motors So a complete town in Annabra is dedicated to manufacturing, and you need to show up there and see the kind of ingenuity. People converting car engines to generators and running industrial complex for 24 hours. We need to understand what's happening there. We need to be replicating those positive stories across the length and breadth of this country. But because they've allowed a certain kind of people, dictate the narrative of that state for a long time, and so they whittle down, the picking order. Maybe a Soludo, like he promised the last time he came, that he will make Annabra a Taiwan. And maybe people are really looking forward to
really
a small
hopeful.
Taiwan in Annabra, which is coming. So we wish him well, and what we'll do now as journalists is to sit back, look at where we can offer praise or criticism as he journeys through his own tenure.
Okay, let's talk about something that's of concern to, every single Nigerian and seems to come up every day, and that's insecurity. Talking about the bandits that killed policemen in Zamfara, 7 policemen in Zamfara, and also the AVM, his daughter and his orderly that, were killed in Kaduna. Let's have your thoughts on this.
Every life is important, whether it's that of a security personnel or even a citizen for that matter. But it's even more scary when your first line of defense is breached. When you come around an environment, some of the things that give you peace of mind is the presence of security apparatus or security personnel. More so when they get killed in the line of duty. It's not like a robbery or they had accident, but a frontal attack, well calculated, deliberate, it's an affront on the state, because this guy, the uniform they put on is a symbol of the state, and the state is you and I. They are not at war. Well, it may be a war zone of some sort, but these are people on a patrol, gunned down. And the painful thing is, we hear these stories and there are nothing else around how, whether they were chased down, whether they were responses from our own security apparatus, whether they were there is no sane country where you do this kind of things and just walk away. That's the painful part. And we need to, it also calls for the need to reappraise our strategy. I remember sometimes in Bauchi, around 2010 and 2012, while I was working there, and the security situation became very dire. You rarely will find a single vehicle going on a patrol because they were getting hit. And so what they were doing was, one would be in front, and a few meters after you'll find another, and sometimes another. The idea is, if you hit one, we are going to respond almost immediately. It's not, you would rarely conduct a successful hit and run because response is just somewhere close. And if you think of what you can coordinate to hit 3, then it's almost impossible for you. So it brought down casualty rate. I don't know what the situation is, but indeed it calls for the need to reappraise some of these people and begin to rethink our security apparatus. We said we have satellites everywhere in the space. Would it be wrong sometimes when these patrols are going on that there could be some kind of area surveillance? The whites do it, and there's somebody overlooking a place and directing the guys to say, hey, we think there is trouble here, or we suspect that this is not all clean. Or even where those people succeed in carrying out an operation, we could have a clue at least as to what's this nature of attack? How did it happen? Was it an ambush? How did they do it? So that you build some of those feedbacks into your strategy and then cut down on this casualty. Every time these people go down, it means our walls are being breached heavily, and it's something we will pay for if we are not careful. And when I say pay for it, we will pay for with our sovereignty if we are not careful.
Okay, so before we wrap up this segment of the program, let's take a look at another story about aviation fuel price rises by 70%. International airlines may rise fares. Just yesterday, a passenger was talking to me about traveling from Oshun to Abuja, and it was about 80,000, and that's quite for domestic, travel alone. What are your thoughts about this?
Painful. Only recently we commissioned the work. I think we had even done it on the Daily Trust paper, where we had to say, lately in the last 3-4 years, we have seen a lot of influx of new carriers. Even the existing carriers improved capacities. Aeros have brought in more planes. Airpeace have brought in more planes. We have seen new entrants like Max and all of that. But why is this new entrance not translating into drop in prices? You have seen Grain Africa, we have seen United Nigeria and all of that. But what's happening with more entrants, and we're still seeing prices going up? When we drill down on the issues, there are quite a number of issues that have refused to go away. First of all is the issue of the dollar. The continuous devaluation had meant that for these people to sustain their operations, they have to raise prices. You know why? All maintenance are done abroad. And so they need dollars to do maintenance abroad. And because it is a highly regulated industry, you cannot skip maintenance. It's not like with the public transport where after we hit the road, then the driver will tell you the brakes are not okay, but when we get to Kaduna, we will fix it. You can't do that mid-air, right? So there are standard specifications for how these things are done. You are being monitored even by the manufacturer of that airplane. Every time you take off and land, and the number of takeoff determines whether you draw closer to a maintenance date or not, and the nature of the maintenance. If not, it will be deemed unworthy to fly. Right. And even some of the pilots who are very careful will not even jump on those things if maintenance. That's why record keeping in that industry is huge. So if they have to do this maintenance abroad, they need the necessary dollars. And if you have to convert so much naira to a dollar, it means you have to charge so much naira to raise the dollar. That's one aspect of it too. And refineries aren't working. So we are not even doing petroleum, not to talk about jet one fuel. It also then means that fueling is done in dollars. So then the engineers who do these operations are also paid, the expatriates are paid in dollars. You know, so when you think that you are operating in a naira environment and all your maintenance and cost of operation is dollarized, it then means for you to meet those obligations, you will have to charge so much. The worst case is we don't even have an MRO here, maintenance equipment here. To even manage some of those routine maintenance and not to even talk about spare parts. So it's a huge problem on the one hand that they are trying to live with, because they operate in the same environment as ourselves. And the demands are increasing because with the insecurity, it means more and more people are going off the roads and jumping on these metal beds. And the other thing, you were talking about Ocean and these places, is load factor. So if you then have to do an interior place where you may go and come back empty, it means the people going may be forced to pay twice as much to cover for whatever empty space they'll have to take back, because they have to break even. It's a business in the first place before whatever we think of it. So it's a delicate issue. And tackling it will require multi-pronged approach, including a concerted effort, maybe by industry players themselves, to come up with a maintenance facility around this country. And I think we deserve one with the number of metal beds that we have in this country. And then begin to think of other out-of-the-box approach, to take care of some of the lingering issues in the industry, including charges by government.
Okay, well, thank you so much.